I'd like to welcome you all to the Lincolnshire Police Crime Panel for today's meeting. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be uploaded after the meeting. There is no planned fire drill today, so if the fire alarm does sound, members of the staff will guide you safely out the building. We will now proceed with the business as outlined on the agenda. So, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Bradwell.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest for today's business? No, don't see any. Okay, we'll move to item 3 then. Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of September. Could I have a proposal for those minutes, please? Councillor Skinner, thank you. And the seconder, Councillor Marsh. Thank you very much. I'd just like to raise from those minutes that you will recall that we wrote to the Home Office regarding additional co-opted independent members, and we have had a response. Do you want to just outline the general response?
Yes, so we did apply for the additional co-opted members. The Home Office have come back to us and said that we need to do some sort of recruitment exercise first and put forward a named member because we need to prove that the additional independent co-opted members meets the balance appointment objective for the panel.
Okay, thank you. So I would propose that we've had a task group look at the annual report. I would propose that members of that task group and any other member that would like to join it look at this on our behalf as a panel and carry out the skills audit and then look at the appointment process so we can rewrite that back to the Home Office. So does anybody second that? Happy to. Thank you, Councillor Beale. All in favour? Thank you very much. Okay, so if I could ask you, Mr. Williams, because you looked at that, the annual report, if you could lead on that, with that task group. And then if any other member wishes to join that task group on that, please contact Emily to take that forward. Yep.
So 1 point of accuracy on the minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Paragraph 21, first bullet. The Commissioner advised that the role of the Major should probably read the role of Mayor. That's with declaring a military service.
Can we just check that everyone's happy to make that change?
Members happy to make that change? Yeah, all in favour, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Williams. So in terms of actions from those minutes, are they all complete, please?
Mr. Chairman, we just had a couple of outstanding actions from the action list in relation to the 20th of June, the new policing model and maintaining operational efficiency. But we do, that is in progress and we do expect an update at future meetings. And then we do have the finance briefing scheduled for 16th of January now, and that will outline the briefing paper on the measures proposed for addressing the funding gap.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on those actions? No. Thank you. Communication from the chairman, I have none today. So moving on to item 6, questions from the public. Do we have any questions from members of the public?
No, we have.
There are no questions from members of the public. Item 7 then, the work of the PCC to reduce violence against women and girls and support victims. Over to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I know members will have read through this. It was a piece of work that was requested as a sort of deep dive by the panel. What I would like to say in addition is that the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner has now been in post around 3 months. She's doing some excellent work, but in particular, I would highlight the fact that she led last night on the Reclaim the Night work, setting up at the University in Lincoln. She addressed over 1,000 people there last night before they set off, and then sort of led that through the city to really just make sure that as the nights draw in and things get darker, it's really about making sure that the agenda, particularly against violence that disproportionately affects women and girls, is at the forefront of people's minds in our community. So I would commend her for the work that she's doing in that space, and she's showing some really strong leadership from the very early stages of taking on the role.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. We do have a number of questions, so I'll kick us off. Councillor Passel, first question.
Thank you, Chairman. and thank you for coming today, Commissioner. For the sake of clarity, when talking about women and girls in the context of the VAWG, what is the definition of a woman or a girl? This is, and what is the status of trans women and trans girls, be they male to female or female to male? Domestic abuse and domestic homicides and homicides in general and sexual offences have an even larger disproportionate effect on the trans community. So if not included in the VAWG programme, what measures are being taken, if any, to protect this vulnerable group?
Thank you for the question. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that the VAWG, as we will call it for brevity, agenda was instigated by national government. So it is crime types that disproportionately affect women and girls. It is not exclusively working with and for women and girls. So it is accepted that violence against men and boys or people of any gender are included in the work stream, but it is particularly looking at areas where women and girls are disproportionately affected. So the definition includes everybody, regardless of their gender. And I think that's really, really important. We know that a significant amount of domestic abuse, for example, happens to men, and they are not excluded from this work stream. But if I'm being really honest, I think the definition obviously implies women and girls. It's in there, but it is very much an inclusive work stream. So I can't sort of break that down anymore. It literally includes everybody.
Okay, thank you.
You want to take the next question?
Yes, if I could, please. The rates of domestic abuse, sexual assault and homicides talk about domestic percentages. What percentage of the overall figures of these offences do these statistics account for?
Well, what I would suggest is these are exactly the kind of questions that if you provide them in advance, I'd be able to bring detailed answers to the meeting. And it's something I've said for the last 8 years. I'm happy to give you detail, but I'm not going to know it off the top of my head. It's an unreasonable expectation for me to have every statistic. So I'm happy to find out. I can give it you after the meeting. But I would urge, if you've got detailed questions, I'd happily bring the statistics to the meeting for you, so you could then ask supplementary questions on it. And I would urge the panel maybe to think about if we can build that in, because I could give you much better, more informed answers. But I'm happy to come back to you with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Williams, next question.
Yeah, your report, you mention a number of government initiatives and aims in respect of this area. For example, including domestic abuse specialists in the control room. So what I was interested in is what resource implications you see violence against women and girls having in relation to those sorts of areas. Are there any critical issues, difficulties that you anticipate?
Well, I think the main critical issue is the fact that while we're facing 17 to 19 million pound hole in our budget for next year, then that affects all services regardless of crime type. And it will be for the Chief Constable ultimately to address the matter of where those priorities sit and how he's going to keep the community of Lincolnshire safe within the financial envelope we can provide. So it will be challenging, but equally, we haven't yet got clarity from government about what they're going to fund specifically in different areas. So it could be that we find more ring-fenced funding around these kind of areas, in which case it'll be less of a financial pressure. If they make it a statutory duty, we must do certain things. Quite often they will consider that a new burden and will then provide funding to sit alongside it. If they say it's guidance and best practice, obviously it's open to each local area as to how they deliver that, or indeed whether they deliver that. And those are the kind of decisions that will need to be taken in light of the affordability. So we have got a good record in Lincolnshire of supporting this. Suzanne Davis has been an excellent superintendent leading on. She has now retired. They've got a member of staff that's been leading nationally on a lot of this work and comes back to Lincolnshire in the new year, who should then take on this mantle as well as some other work. So we've got some very experienced, high quality people working in the area, particularly around domestic abuse, sexual violence, and the relationships and processes we've built up with partners such as Rape Crisis and others are really leading the way nationally. So regarding the specifics of what pressures we might face, I think that's still open for debate, depending on how government leaders to approach it, and equally how the Chief Constable chooses to address it. But it is a priority. It is something that we all recognise, with around 16,500 reported incidents of domestic abuse in Lincolnshire a year. It is clearly a significant area that we want to work to protect our communities from. And when you look at the homicide figures, a large percentage of them start off and end, sadly, in a domestic setting. So we know that that is an area that we need to work very hard to protect our communities.
Thank you very much. You mentioned in the report Safer Streets Mission Board, and I just wonder whether PCCs are represented on that.
I don't think it's yet been established. It's been a commitment by the government, but there've been no conversations with our officers yet on it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, Councillor Pessell, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the use of domestic abuse risk orders, is the PCC concerned about the mixing of civil and criminal law in the use of these orders, either application through civil bodies or even individuals to impose the use of these powers on potential abusers? Does he think there are sufficient safeguards in place to prevent the misuse or abuse of these powers?
I mean, it's quite an operational question and something that I would expect the Chief Constable to have a view on. He certainly hasn't raised with me any concerns or anything he wants me to do in the more political space around that. So by the fact that he has not raised that as a concern, that would generally mean he's comfortable with the position, but it isn't something I've directly obviously asked him the question on. But at this stage, it isn't something that's on the radar as being an area of concern.
Okay.
Councillor Pessell, do you want to continue?
Yeah.
With the next
Thank
question?
you, Chairman. Are there any statistics to show that the spike of drinks or similar are problems in Lincolnshire, either as a whole or in specific locations?
Well, spiking of drinks is something that's definitely not new anywhere. It's happened for a very, very long time. And we do go through periods of time where it seems to be more at the front of the public's consciousness than at other times. And there is some information, we certainly get reports from the public reporting spiking, and indeed from NHS colleagues, which would suggest that they are treating people that have been subject to being spiked. So the police obviously investigate those incidents. I wouldn't say we are disproportionately affected compared to anywhere else in that respect. We do a lot of work, particularly with the student body, to raise awareness. We have a police officer that's based with the university to work very closely with the student body to make sure, particularly around Freshers Week and other times, to make sure that people understand the risks, make sure that both they're protecting themselves, but also to alert any would-be perpetrators that we're all over that issue. I think as well, it's defining what we mean by spiking, because they're obviously consideration around legislation, etc. And actually, I would suggest the most prevalent spiking you see is when somebody goes to get somebody a drink from the bar and they buy them a double, triple. It's not necessarily putting illegal drugs into somebody's drink. It's often that somebody thinks they've, over the course of an evening, have 5 vodkas and they've had 15 vodkas and they didn't know it. That for me is the most prevalent kind of spiking. And I think that's an education piece of work we need to do with our young people, both, frankly, it is more likely to happen to women, but it certainly isn't exclusively. But we need our young men and women understanding the risks and equally understanding the implications of doing it. Buying somebody a double when you didn't tell them you're buying them a double over the course of an evening can have a massive effect, not just on their capacity to consent, but also on their ability to get home safely if they don't know that they've taken on that level of alcohol. So, and obviously if they've got underlying health issues and other things. So I think the area around this is one that Lincolnshire is very aware of. We work well with the student bodies. The police are very responsive to reports. So I don't think we're disproportionately affected, but I do think we're very aware.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner, you outlined a number of initiatives and funding in respect of VAW. But I see that the working group panel recommended that Lincolnshire Police streamline actions, focus on a smaller range of initiatives, and be much clearer on what success looks like. You do say in your report that the force is confident with the work carried out by the VAW lead within the VAW delivery board, but it still isn't clear from what I'm reading anyway, how you're able to assess the impact of those initiatives, what impact they've had and how you measure their effectiveness. So what I'm really asking is, can you provide some clarification on how you measure the success of the VAW programme and indeed what success looks like in your view?
Yeah, I mean, it's often very difficult in this space because in one respect, you're trying to increase people's confidence to report, which arguably will put up reported numbers, whether that's of crimes or of incidents. But at the same time, you want the police to bear down in an actionable way upon those incidents. So it's quite a complex picture because, you know, we know that the police are concentrating on education and trying to raise awareness and trying to work to, if you like, make people aware so that they don't become victims of certain crime types. And equally, inadvertently, sometimes, not just overtly, but people's behaviour can be perceived in a negative way and they can become part of the problem towards mainly women and girls. So we want people to understand the consequences of the way they behave and their actions and everything else. So the police are very good at doing that. But at the same time, it's quite difficult to prove the absence of something. So, for example, if we spend a lot of time speaking to 13-year-old boys and girls in schools to educate them about how the impact of certain language and behaviours can affect feelings of safety and sort of make people feel less safe in the public realm, it's very hard to judge how successful you've been at landing those messages because, frankly, it will need not just a single message, but a continuation of societal challenge and pressure to be able to change those behaviours over time. So therefore, some of it is quite difficult to affect what is the impact. I still maintain that delivering those education programmes is worthwhile in the absence of definitive proof. What is clearer is to be able to say, well, how do we actually get some clarity around sort of specifics? So, for example, the force has a rape scrutiny panel where a group of people that includes the IAG, includes Rape Crisis, includes people from my office, all come together to actually, a bit like the out of court scrutiny panels, where they look at specific cases and go, has this been dealt with correctly? What trips have been missed? Did the officer do the right things? Have they kept people informed? All of those things. Now, I'd have to say that's highlighted some areas for improvement that we are working with the force on. But equally, we need those kind of learning journeys to just be part of the supervisory processes within. That's the bit where I think the force need to work on. It shouldn't rely on a scrutiny panel to be the front line of checking what's going on the ground. So I think there is work to do from an operational point of view. And what I would say to answer your question directly is the force need to do that. That's the pressure I need to bring to bear, and I'm bringing to bear, is to say the force need to put the process in place to provide themselves the assurance that they're getting this right, so that they're in a position to answer my question. And equally then when we sit there on the scrutiny panels, we're getting that additional assurance from those direct encounters. But what I shouldn't be doing is literally being the police of the police at the front line. The service needs to do that. And that's really where we're working at the moment.
That's for Bill, you wanted to.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. You mentioned with regards to initiatives and obviously education, etc., they're happening at Sleeper Police Station. Are there any results coming out from that, please? The night centre.
Yeah, I mean, it's again one of those where proving the absence of something is quite tricky. Has somebody not been stabbed as a result of that? Who knows? Has somebody that's been injured had really good care at the side of the road as a result of training we've provided young people? Hard to tell. But what we are getting is incredible feedback, both from the educational facilities that are taking the young people there and the young people themselves. So initially, the target audience for going through that process are people that are considered most likely by their educational facilities to be in situations where it would be of most benefit. And that's quite a loose definition. It could be that they live in a particular geography, or, you know, there are certain incidents that are going on in an area, so they feel that it would be beneficial for them to go on. So the schools are self-selecting who they put through, but all of the feedback has been exceptionally positive, that the young people are engaged with the programme. They found it valuable and useful. So all the feedback forms that are completed are good. It's very hard to know what the long-term cumulative effect will be until you get there. But it is something that obviously we're monitoring, because the funding has to be renewed. And so it's not an endless funding pot. So a decision will have to be made based on the performance, whether it continues to be funded.
Thank you. I appreciate obviously that GDPR kicks in, but do they go back to the schools, say 3-6 months later, to see what the children have remembered, and does it still apply?
There is an evaluation, but I'm not entirely sure how that's constructed.
It's done on exit from the facility rather than
Got you.
after a duration of time.
Yeah. So there isn't sort of a legacy point at which they're sort of grilling the children again. I think it would be very difficult to do with the volume of people that were trying to get through there. It would in effect need probably another full-time member of staff to then evaluate in that way. And I think it is that thing of, do you on trust go, it is a good thing to educate young people, provide them the right tools to save lives, to avoid getting in incidents, to understand the implications of certain actions that they might undertake. And I think most people would think that in itself is sufficient to say it's a worthwhile investment. So I guess time will tell whether those young people go on not to be involved in incidents. But I certainly think that when I look at what other provisions around the country, what we're doing here is very much at the forefront of that. So I've got a high level of confidence that it will have a positive impact on the young people in the way that they're telling us it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of measure,
Just in addition to that, I attend the Serious Violence Group and the Youth Offending Board on behalf of the Commissioner. Feedback from the Futures for Me service, which is the youth offending service across Lincolnshire, has been extremely positive about the happening. So in addition to the feedback we've got from the young people who've been through the centre, partner feedback from colleagues in Futures for Me and in education who've taken young people through the centre has been really positive. But we saw at the Serious Violence Group the stats around the young people who've gone through there, and some of the high level outcomes were presented as well.
thank you for that. Councillor Burke.
Just turning my mind a bit towards Lincoln, Commissioner. Are we seeing measures to deal with knife crime at this kind of education? Is there anything like that relating to the city? I suspect, I don't know.
But the facility is county-wide, so it happens to be in the former custody suite at Sleaford Police Station, but it is accessed from across the county.
Right.
So, so we work with, the educational facilities take the children to the facility, it's booked, but it's been from across the county and certainly much further afield than Lincoln. So obviously it's not too far to get to Sleaford, but it is a really worthwhile sort of thing for them to do. And I think what's been great, the education facilities have recognised that this is a really good opportunity for them to work with young people. And the fact that it's been set up in a way that it is truly educational, it's not trying to frighten them, it's not trying to scare them off, it's genuinely appealing to them in the right way, that's what's making it work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, in terms of measuring success, is there a specific data set with ORC?
No. I mean, there isn't like a government sort of league table of different things. I mean, it doesn't really sit in a single place. This is the problem. It's a theme rather than a specific.
Yeah, I understand it's a theme. But I mean, here in Lincolnshire, whether it's I mean, the government don't need to do it. You could do it in Lincolnshire and it's your decision at the end of the day. I know that, and the Chief Constable. But actually, it would focus success and performance if there was a data set on the specific elements of book.
I mean, certain crime types, obviously, we collect data on.
Yeah.
So domestic abuse, for example.
Yeah.
The number of rapes, those are data sets we collect.
Yeah.
So we've got those kind of data sets. It's just not pulled together in a specific org way. I think yeah. So at the next strategic board that we've got with the police, they're bringing to us, because we get thematic reports on different subjects coming to there, and we have requested a full thematic, which will basically give us that overview of what Lincolnshire Police are doing, where the chief thinks they're at. So we will be getting that. Is it the next one or the one after? It's fairly soon, isn't it? So in the next few weeks, we will have that latest thematic around board. But that will sort of give me a much more detailed view of where the force is across the board.
And will that include detection of these crimes as well?
Yeah, I mean, normally it will obviously give me details about outcomes as well as.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Pete. Okay, thank you very much. Next question, Councillor Pestle, thank you.
Yeah. In relation to the "You're Right, That's Wrong" campaign, does the PCC think the bar of what counts as misogyny is sufficiently clear and set at the right level? Is there any way of avoiding the criminalisation of mere thoughts?
I mean, I think it's quite difficult for me to sit here and say, well, you know, this is a definitive of where this should be, because it will mean different things to different people ultimately. But you know, it has to be interpreted by the law, by the police, by the courts. So I think it probably is about right until society changes its mind and says otherwise. Because if we said 30 years ago, what's about right for the police to be doing versus now, you'd get a very different answer. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to answer in light of the fact that, you know, we see society and government directives and police action change constantly. But I think, given what we know, we do our best with the information we've got to try and work to change behaviours in a positive way. I mean, really what we're trying to do is trying to make sure people treat each other with respect in society, in the hope that they will become good citizens, pass on that better message to the next generation, and ultimately we'll all live better, happier lives as a result. I think when you look at it in that broad sense, it's much easier than when you get down to, did somebody tweet a word that somebody else didn't like? I think that gets very complicated and messy very quickly.
Right.
Next question.
Yeah. In relation to the Lincolnshire Domestic Abuse Support Service, is this system going to be modelled on the anti-cuckooing approach to engage wider service providers? If not, how will it be different and why?
Could I just ask you what number?
3.2.14.
Well, the LDAS programme is jointly commissioned. It's not commissioned by me. It's commissioned by the county council primarily, and then we supported them in that commissioning. You were involved in that, Joe, weren't you?
So LDAS is the Victims Support Division of Victims of Domestic Abuse, which is commissioned to Lincolnshire County Council, which we kind of partly fund. So it's that direct support to victims, either online or face to face, who've been assessed as, once they've reported being a victim of domestic abuse, there's a needs assessment undertaken, and then they put in place the provision. But there's also an outreach arm for that function where they go out and raise awareness across the communities of Lincolnshire around what domestic abuse is and how you can report it and seek support.
Right. So essentially, we're saying that it's county led, but it falls along the same sort of integrated, joined up way of getting input from all partner agencies. Would that be fair?
Yes, so although we don't directly commission it, I was on part of the commissioning panel and looked at the specification to make sure that it aligned and fit with our existing victim outreach services. And Suzanne McClarty, who's our victims commissioning lead, hosts a quarterly provider network where all of the victim support providers, whether they're commissioned by us, LCC, or whether they're just or whether they're a voluntary community sector organisation providing services in Lincolnshire, they're all brought together. And that is used as a way of cascading information to them about what's happening from the centre, such as some of the national examples that have been mentioned today, but also making sure they're working in a joined up and connected way. So they've all had an opportunity to describe their services to each other, which we thought they might have already known that, but they didn't. So that was great, giving them that connection. They also, the commissioner attends, as has the deputy commissioner, to talk to those services. It gives them an opportunity to escalate up if there's unmet needs or gaps identified in service. And as I say, an opportunity for us to cascade information down, such as where there might be funding and the like that they can apply for.
Thank you. Carry on.
Yeah, carry on.
Can the BCC point to any evidence, and this may be trying to prove a negative, of the effectiveness of harm reduction brought about through the VAR education programme in schools?
Well, what I can point to is the conversations that the young people have at the time are very open, honest, positive. Some of those are genuinely talking about some of the perceptions that they have, mainly from their home life, and you know, their sort of peer-to-peer challenge is very important in that space. It's creating an environment where young people can discuss and debate things in a sensible way. And that can only be healthy. That can be a really positive thing. And actually, you don't get boys and girls sitting around a playground talking about, you know, how different behaviours make them feel. Where actually, if you create that facility, it'll be the first time. And I'm using this as the generic, but it's not exclusively this way round. But boys sitting there hearing from girls that actually on their walk to school being wolf whistled from vans makes them feel exceedingly uncomfortable. Hearing that actually if they're walking home and there's a group of lads behind them, often they'll want to cross the road because they feel safer. Those kind of things are not done to demonise the boys. They are done to raise awareness in the boys that inadvertently they can be making other people feel uncomfortable, and actually how their own actions can have a positive or negative impact on the world around them. And I think this also goes across another world. When we talk to young people about antisocial behaviour, for example, they are very unaware quite often that they're what they would consider normal, friendly interactions as young people together in a park, for example, might be considered intimidating or antisocial to somebody else in the park. So actually having those conversations is really helpful rather than just waiting for something to go wrong. So there's lots and lots of anecdotal information about how the young people receive that information. And it is about provoking thought in those young people about how they interact with the world as they grow up. So I think it is very much about societal change, which isn't just about my role, the county's role, health's role. It's everybody's business to try and support that mindset change to make sure that, you know, people like my 16-year-old daughter can go about her business feeling safe, being safe. And to be fair, if I had a 16-year-old boy, I would want him to go around his business feeling and being safe as well. So it's not specifically about girls, but we know these kind of issues do disproportionately affect.
Thank you. I think your next question, Councillor Pestle, we're probably right to not forget, because they're statistics and we can't expect him to.
That's fair.
That. So we'll write to the Commissioner. Thank you. So, but you have another question, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Can BCC comment on the effectiveness of the cooperation between Lincolnshire Police and the forces enforcing criminal law in the military in dealing with VARG-style offences within our various communities, military communities around the country, both in terms of service personnel and their wider families? Has there been any noticeable difference in attitudes to willingness to engage with the programme or any statistics that have come out specifically targeting them.
I mean, I'm not sat here with lots of statistics around that, but for example, I spent time the other day with the commanding officer of RAF Cranwell at the passing out some new officers, and we were talking specifically about the cooperation between the military police and Lincolnshire police, not just around Cranwell but across the county. And then I was fortunate enough to meet some of the military police, and we were talking about a number of areas of joint working, areas where drug dogs, for example, are deployed on the East Coast from the military to work with Lincolnshire police to try and keep our nighttime economy drug-free and safe through the summer months. Areas where we are working on joint drone operations and other things around both operations to look for vulnerable missing people, but also training and learning. But the other thing that came up was around challenges around things like driving. So drink driving outside of the gates, but going to and from bases and speeding, but also about areas of war where there's a lot of change in attitudes in the military towards being open and wanting to have those conversations, and they are working closely with the police to actually make sure they're sharing learning to equip the military police with as much skill and latest thinking as possible. And I think that's something that's really changed. So I think it's fairly well recognised that the territorial police forces get a lot more input around these things than military police would, but there is a really good working relationship between those forces. So I can't speak for the wider UK, but I can speak for Lincolnshire and say we've got a very good, active working relationship with the military police across the county in a number of different areas. So it's probably one of the more progressive relationships in that respect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Marsh.
Just a supplementary, Commissioner, you say that the military drug dogs are assisting the civil police. I'm quite interested. Is that because we have cut down our dogs that the police own so that we can't carry out that function properly? And it also raises, I'm quite surprised that it's almost putting military on the streets, which is something which is not, well, it's alien in this country, isn't it?
Well, it's been done for a number of years in Lincolnshire in this respect. So we've got a memorandum of understanding which permits it. So we have got the right provisions in place to be able to do it. And it's not to do with our lack of dogs. It's to do with the fact that their dogs need the exercise, the training, the real world experience. So it helps them significantly, but at the same time gives us additional capacity. So it by sort of having that experience of going down the queues of people waiting to get into clubs and pubs and staying there, it sharpens the senses of the dogs for when they're working behind the fence and on deployment in different places. So it works for everybody. But yeah, it is an unusual, but it's not a unique relationship. I'm aware Thames Valley operate a similar process as well. But I mean, it is done in other areas of business, but it obviously isn't done across all areas of business. But we do, for example, do joint speed check patrols and that kind of thing, particularly near bases, because a lot of the personnel we will be stopping will be RAF personnel. So it's very useful for the military police to be involved in that conversation.
Thank you. I mean, that's really interesting, but it leads on to another one. If we're getting military and civil, and we're dealing with primarily, because a lot of these service people, they're young, we train them to go out there and be aggressive and defend the country, and then we expect them to be really passive when they're here, and it doesn't always work like that. If we find offending there and it's low level, do we let the military take over or have primacy with sorting out, or do we take it through our processes?
That would be an operational decision, Councillor. I mean, ultimately, if there was a crime committed, I would fully expect Lincolnshire Police to take primacy in the fact that a crime had been committed. If there were words of advice being given, I'm sure the words of advice they're given behind their fence are quite robust.
Thank you.
Very diplomatic.
Okay. Right, that concludes our. Oh, sorry.
Just for other points I mentioned earlier, sort of loosely related potentially, but a lot of talk on the airwaves at the moment about non-crime hate incidents. And I guess the question that came up in my mind, it's not specifically related to Borg, but more generally, is there, how do you feel about, what's your assessment of Lincolnshire Police's approach to non-crime hate incidents? Are you in relation to other forces?
I suppose, and this is a broad opinion rather than anything else. I worked quite hard with the previous government to redefine where that boundary needed to be. I think there was far too much recording of things going on that was swallowing up police time, that they could have been doing something else, frankly, that was more important. That isn't to say that some things don't need recording, but there was a significant amount of recording. I welcomed the changes that have been brought in. I feel that they're being repealed, and I think that's not good. I think you will tie up lots more police time recording things without currently clear guidance about which should be recorded and which shouldn't, which is where the rub is. So I think Police Chiefs Council need to be issuing very clear guidance. College of Policing need to issue very clear guidance, because at the moment, College of Policing have updated their guidance in line with what the previous government decreed. We seem to be getting a different view coming out, so we'll have to wait and see what the College of Policing make of that. But the College of Policing were challenged in court over what was happening previously, which is why the rules were changed. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But I think Lincolnshire, like all the other forces, will do their best to apply what's in front of them. But it's very hard to apply something that's opaque. And I will be pushing for clarity so that the force can be clear with the public about what they'll be doing. I don't think they're disproportionately spending time doing things like that, because they haven't frankly got the time to disproportionately spend on anything. But I do think they need clarity.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Councillor Burke.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to explore slightly in this area where lack of definition leading to a waste of police time. And how much of this is it worth a discussion between you and the people like Yvette Cooper, or with the, a combination of other police and crime commissioners, to just help the government more clearly understand?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we do at a national level. We've got our national conference next week with Police Chiefs Council and PCCs, and the Home Secretary, Police Minister and shadow versions will all be there. But there is a really big difference of opinion between the Home Secretary and the Shadow Home Secretary on this. And obviously one of them is the Home Secretary. So that's what's going to happen. At the moment, what we're doing is what the Shadow Home Secretary put in place. So if it's going to move, I'm just urging clarity. It's totally right that the Home Secretary can set an agenda, but we need to know what the rules are. And we need clarity for frontline officers, because it's just simply not fair for the public or the officers if we don't quite know what we're expected to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. That concludes our questioning around the good work that's being done on Borg. Very important work in this county and elsewhere. So I'll move to item 8 on the agenda, which is the delivery of the police and crime plan. So over to you again, Commissioner.
Yeah, and again, it's the format we always deliver, so I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. There are indeed. Councillor Pessell, thank you.
Chairman, where have the new CCTV facilities been placed in Sleaford Town Centre? Was this choice made after consultation with local stakeholders and or driven by specific intelligence and crime patterns?
I mean, firstly, I would say I wouldn't possibly wish to say publicly where they've been specifically put, but they have been placed based on intelligence and information. So it's generally that the district council has a very strong view on gaps. We've done a really big piece of work looking at the county, where the gaps are, where the overlaps are, that kind of thing. So it is intelligence led, and it's to obviously try and tackle criminality and prevent antisocial behaviour. But ultimately, the sighting is driven by information. It's not randomly picked.
Specifically, so we liaised with Heidi Ryder, who's the community safety lead at North Stephen District Council. There was a range of information used, including crime statistics from the police, We use the street safe reports that are made by the public about areas where they don't feel particularly safe for whatever reason. And we also used community consultation, which MK had recently done around some of their place-based initiatives. So those three things combined determined where the CCTV was put.
That's super, thank you.
Councillor Skinner, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, performance indicators in several district councils record the incident packages requested and then the package is delivered. So that actually gives you an idea of what's actually been requested and actually how much is going forward with the CPS. Are those statistics going to still be available if they're sat off somewhere else? Because it does give district councils quite a good feel to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that process you've just described isn't what I'm familiar with. I mean, I can't see why data that's currently available would suddenly not be available, because it will still be collated, and it will be geographically based. So I can't see a scenario why it would be an issue. What I would urge you to do is, if you feel or see, and this would go for every district, if there suddenly is a change for any reason, you feel that that's an issue, please raise it with me. You don't have to wait till the meeting, and I will take that up. But I'm not aware of any changes that would prevent you having access to data that you've currently got.
It's just who's running the CTV setup, that's all. I mean,
That has not changed.
okay,
That has not changed.
that's clarification. Thank you.
You want to take your question now, councillor?
Thank you. Commissioner, I'd like to ask a question on where we are regarding the delivery of our core policing priorities established in 2023 and how we're measuring it. They're listed on Lincolnshire Police's webpage, and two bits regarding building confidence in policing and delivering a thoughtful and effective service. I mean, rural crime on small business disproportionately affects people living in, let's say, deprived circumstances anyway, whether it's shops or filling stations. And from the point of view of if you introduce modern sort of card fill pumps to places which are about 50k a place, that doesn't necessarily change it. There's still a crime being committed, and there's a lot of people feel really quite strongly about how that's delivered. And net result is, if some of these people steal a credit card, we all pay for that anyway, and that's paid for in the percentage we pay of interest rates to the credit card companies and the banks. So just wondering where we are with all this.
Okay, there was at least two questions in there.
Three.
There was one very specifically about what we would call bilking, which is the driving off without paying at petrol stations. That was a very specific thing, which I'm assuming comes on the fact that it's been in the media fairly recently, which I'll address separately. Is there a point in the report that you're referencing so I can go to it? Or is this just a general comment you're making?
A general, where are we, how are we measuring it? And on those two objectives, where are we?
Okay, well, given that I've come prepared to answer questions on the report I provided, I'll come back to you on that if I may, so I can give you an answer. With the specifics of the driving off without paying, the way it's constructed is that first and foremost, this is addressed as a civil matter, in the same way that parking is addressed first and foremost as a civil matter. But if there are extenuating circumstances, the police can be involved. So, for example, forecourts are members of an organisation which will seek to get the money back for them, and that is the route that they take in the first instance. So they are likely to get their money back by going through their association, which they already are members of. That is the route that petrol stations go through. There is a difference between somebody who has either forgotten method of payment and comes back later and pays, or absent-mindedly forgets to pay. And I would draw an analogy between something that I myself have done, for which I was very embarrassed when I got a call from the local pub saying, you had Sunday lunch today, but I note you went away without paying it. And I was chatting, I was busy, I forgot. And I went back and very red-faced paid what I owed. That did not make me a thief. I was not intentionally trying to deprive them of the goods or the payment. There are a number of things that happen. Now, most fuel stations want you to go into the shop and buy stuff because there's more profit in that than there is in fuel. So I understand why most businesses of that kind don't like prepay and pay a pump. But most businesses are now choosing to do it that way to avoid going through the civil issues of losing the revenue. What that does, it means that if somebody is intentionally wanting to drive off without payment, they are more likely to use a petrol station that has not invested in that technology. So arguably, there will be a smaller number of places that then become disproportionately affected by that particular issue until they themselves invest in preventing the crime. And it's a little bit like if your bike was stolen every Sunday from outside your house, you would buy a bike lock. And society would sort of think that was a reasonable measure for you to take. It doesn't mean it's right that somebody stole your bike, but it would be unreasonable to expect that forever a police officer is going to turn up every Sunday, record the crime, try and find who did it, because it would frankly be cheaper for me to buy them a bike lock. So arguably, it would be cheaper for me to go to a petrol station and pay for them to install pay at pump with your money than it would to get police officers to constantly investigate drive-offs. But equally, I don't think the public would think that a good use of their money. So it's not a straightforward thing. The other thing I would say, specifically with the reports that were in the media, I have followed up with the force to make sure that the station that was mentioned wasn't being disproportionately targeted by repeat offenders. I wanted that assurance. And that is something that they're looking into. But first sight does not look like that is the case, that there are not prolific offenders. And the initial reports were that the media were saying that there were 50 incidents in 6 months at one location, but actually the reports we got logged were 11 over 2 years. So officers are going to that property today or tomorrow to speak directly to the owners to understand why they're reporting to the media that there are 50 incidents in 6 months, yet we've only got logged 11 in 2 years. So I guess it just means that things aren't always what they appear.
No. On the positive side, though, very, very pleased to see the presence in the centre of Boston, tackling some of the cyclists whose bikes weren't stolen on Sunday morning. Thank you.
Or indeed, they might be the stolen bikes that somebody else is riding.
Thank you.
There's two people, well, there's three people for me. Councillor Marsh first.
I'm really disappointed your response to that question, because as far as I'm aware, when I was forced, making off without payment, bilking, is a criminal offence. Straight up and down. There's no doubt about it. The question comes with the police getting involved, is it's arrestable if found committing and reportable if that's finished. And the rule of thumb used to be, if it's 12 hours later, they're no longer making off. But if they're driving away and they stole the petrol at Maglethorpe and they're on the way to on the way to Lincoln, get caught at Lincoln, they're still making off and away. Say that I mean, shops work on, and I speak from experience because I used to run 3 petrol stations with shops with my full line. And the whole point, you're quite right, is about having point of sales. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no association that works and gets your money back for you. We've tried going down the route of getting money back of people through the civil channel. You get the registration number, how do you get the detail of the person, because that's held on DVLA and it's not as easy as people think. And when you take them to court, they refuse to turn up. When you get an order, which you do if they don't turn up, the court in find your favour, you've then got to enforce it. Or they'll come up and say, so it's not as simple as you make it out. And I think that earlier you were talking about keeping our communities safe. Well, the filling stations and the staff there are part of our communities. And I think it's not good policy for the police to be openly saying, this is an offence that we will no longer look at. It's giving licence that come to Lincolnshire and you can take your petrol and not pay for it, because nothing will happen.
First thing I'd say, councillor, is Lincolnshire adopt the same guidance through National Police Chiefs Council as every force of England and Wales. This isn't a Lincolnshire thing. This is an England and Wales approach that has been agreed with the national associations who support the filling stations. It's not a Lincolnshire thing. We were one of the last in the country actually to implement the change 3-4 years ago. And I agree. If somebody is committing an offence, they should be held to account. The harsh reality of this is there is a way of preventing this crime. And if Sainsbury's or any other supermarkets stack a massive load of beer near the front of their building, they calculate that some of it will be stolen, some of it will be purchased, and whether that's going to be profitable. They might employ a security guard, they might not, but they know that will happen. They don't expect Lincolnshire Police or another constabulary to put a full-time officer on the door to stop it being stolen, because that would be unreasonable. They take reasonable steps to prevent the crime themselves, but then over and above that, it's okay and that's perfectly acceptable to expect the police to take appropriate action over and above that. But you've got to be responsible in running the business. The commercial decision not to put things in place to prevent it, it's potentially part of the issue. I'm not saying it's not Lincolnshire Police's issue, but other stations are paying to make sure that their business is protected. Some are not. Now, when you look at a typical busy weekend, and on Monday morning, Lincolnshire Police have got 200, give or take, outstanding jobs unallocated because we haven't got enough officers. I would say, which one of those domestic abuse incidents, which one of those domestic burglaries, which one of those car thefts don't we go to because we keep going back to the petrol station that has chosen for commercial reasons not to invest in preventing that? Because that's the choice. We can't go to everything. We have not got the resource, but we are still applying the same standard as every other force across England and Wales. So I'm not saying that if there was a prolific offender going from station to station, of course the police should be doing that. But there is an association in place to help civil recovery of funds. That exists, it's in place, I've checked it, I've made sure that that's the case. I don't want our businesses to be victims of crime, of course not. That's why I've got the police going out there today or tomorrow to give really good crime prevention advice, understand why they're claiming they've had 50 incidents in 6 months when we've only got 11 over 2 years recorded. We need to be able to support that business, but they've got to take reasonable steps. If somebody was being burgled every single day and they never locked their front door, we'd all be saying, let's help them understand the value of locking their door. It's about reasonable steps. It's not victim blaming. It's saying as a society, we've got to work together, and you can't just say the police will pick it up, because frankly, we have not got the resource to just pick everything up.
I hear what you say, and I think we'll have to agree that we disagree. It's like saying, I can stop burglaries because I'm going to ask everybody to put shutters on the windows and doors and always keep them down unless they're in the house. It's totally unexpected and unacceptable. And the last point I'd like to make is I thought that attending and dealing with incidents was an operational matter, and yet I saw you on television responding to that. Why didn't the Chief Constable come on television?
Well, there was an officer that had gone on. I mean, the question that was put to me was not an operational question as to why they invited me on. I then haven't got control over the question that comes out of the mouth of the reporter. So it isn't always the case that the thing that they tell me they want to talk about is actually the thing that they say. It's a little bit late when you're live on telly to say, I'm not going to talk to you. So you have to sometimes respond in kind. But I usually am very, very clear when something is an operational matter or when it's a matter for the Chief Constable, because I understand where his role starts and finishes and mine begins. So I do tend to make that clear, but it's not that I choose to step into the operational interview space. I certainly don't. But sometimes we don't always get the full detail from media colleagues.
Just following up from that, Commissioner, you've just said that's why I've got the police going out there to this petrol station. But surely, going back to Councillor Marsh's comments, that's a matter for the Chief Constable. He ought to be.
For clarity, I spoke to the Chief Constable. I asked if he had sufficient assurance that there were no repeat issues at that particular location. And if he didn't, would he be able to come back to me with that assurance once he'd looked into it, which is totally appropriate. He then came back to me and said, we have looked at that. We've got a good level of confidence that that's not happening. And I said, well, have we been out to the business? Are we doing that? And he said, I've got somebody that's going out the weekend. It was not me instructing a police officer to go. I was using a shorthand to bring the thing together.
I understand. Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Burke and then Councillor Dilks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just on this disparity between reportage, Commissioner, I'm quite interested if there's something else behind that. Is there an issue in this kind of crime, not that specific crime, but this kind of crime? Do we suspect underreporting? So you've got one set of figures from the police. Over-reporting, I don't know. I'm just wondering about that disparity. Is there a reluctance to accurately report to the police on this?
Well, the claim was that they've reported it 50 times to the police in 6 months. And if that is the case, and I'm not saying they're lying in any way, shape or form, what I'm saying is we've got 11 recorded over 2 years.
Yeah.
So somewhere there's a disparity. So we need to understand why that disparity is there. It could be, on one hand, they've not reported 50 incidents and maybe they were just a little bit over exaggerating. It could equally be that something's happening and they're being recorded in a different way. So maybe it's been recorded as a different crime type or whatever, which will skew the figures, in which case that's an issue that we need to address in the control room. So all of that is being looked at to make sure the data we're getting is accurate, which is why I think it's valuable for them to go out there, offer proper crime prevention advice, understand what's actually happening on the ground, but also then to be able to just check the processing. Because if they're ringing it in, they will have been given incident numbers and other things, so that can be cross-checked with our own processes. So that piece of work will be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Councillor Dill.
Thank you. It's on the same subject. Sorry to prolong it, but I think it is important. Can I just say, did I hear you just say that when BBC interviewed you the day after a senior police officer had gone on this subject, that you didn't know what they were going to ask you, what the subject was?
No, what I was saying was that sometimes the question that will be given to us to say, well, we want you to talk about this particular angle, we will be told it's a non-operational kind of question, but actually the way it's then put across in the interview might be worded differently, which implies it's an operational question. So I don't think it's actually intentional. I think it's just, people that are doing those interviews want to make a good TV programme and they try and word things in the best way they can to make it sound interesting to their viewers. But equally, the subtleties of whether it's operational or not matter to me more than they'll matter to the interviewer. So that can sometimes happen.
I understand that. Thank you. I don't think I was the only one watching that interview that was frankly gobsmacked with the explanation that you now expanded on today. And I've got to say, I'm with Councillor March on this as a former serving police officer. I just find it astonishing to be told that deliberately making off, and I accept some people might forget, but if somebody deliberately makes off without paying for 50, 60, 70 quid worth of fuel, that is theft, and that is a criminal. That's a matter for the police.
Yes.
Not a civil action, as I think you were saying. You believe it is, or that it is. But just to sort of move into my question, was what you're saying is, that these petrol stations, filling stations, need to, take reasonable action to prevent the crime, and we all, of course, expect them to do that, but when you say that, they should install prepayment card things, and you're saying, a lot of them do, that's the industry standard. It may be on one or two pumps, but in my experience, I don't think I've seen a filling station where all the pumps are paid by card. One or two might be normally. Am I wrong on that?
Well, these things are a commercial decision. It's not for me to say whether they should or shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is, the reality is every single one of us that's here today has locked our front door before we arrived, right? Nobody's gone, I tell you what, if I get burgled because I've left my door open, that's not my fault. We take reasonable steps to protect our goods. It's what we do. Now, I'm not saying the police shouldn't investigate where there's clear criminality. The difference with this kind of thing is that it is treated not by me, but by the industry and by policing nationally, that you prove that that's the case, rather than it's assumed that that's the case. So if you have driven off without paying, the first thing that happens is an approach towards civil recovery. That's the way that works. I don't design that. I'm not responsible for creating that situation nationally. It just is the way that works. And it's not a Lincolnshire issue. That is a national issue. Now, I'm not saying that it's perfect by any means, but I'm just saying that is the process and that there is a way of civil recovery. You know, going back to my analogy, my restaurant did not ring the police and say Mark Jones has eaten his food today and gone off without paying, he's stolen from me. They contacted me.
Yeah, because can I just take issue with this?
This is a bit different.
Before you do, we don't need to spend the next hour talking on this subject because there are other things, but yeah.
Yeah, you're using an analogy for yourself, Commissioner, which has no bearing at all with the analogy of someone driving. The shop, the pub owner knew you, had clear recourse to speak to you, and having had filling stations, we had some people that drove off that forget, but we knew they were. We ring them up, they come back and pay. That isn't the issue. The issue is that people do go onto forecourts, deliberately fill up, which is 60, 80 cars from total, and drive off. Now, I can understand that the police maybe don't have 50 recorded for this filling station, but they say they have 50. The chances are the filling station are sick to death and waited 15 minutes on the phone to get an answer and response, and then to be told it's a civil matter, sort it out yourselves.
Well, what I would say in response, Councillor, is please feel free to write to National Police Chiefs Council, see if you can change the national guidance and see how that goes, because it is not down to Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner to change national operational police guidance. This is something that is not a Lincolnshire specific thing. It is something that's national. And I'm telling you the situation as it is. It's an operational decision. I have done what I can in this instance to say to the Chief Constable, but have you got ability to say to me that you have done everything reasonable for this business owner that came to my attention, and he has gone away and taken steps to make sure that everything reasonable has then taken place, which is what I would do for anybody that was in that situation if they were a resident of Lincolnshire and a victim of crime. What I can't do is change national policy for policing around an operational matter. So I don't think we're going to get any further than this, but from my point of view, I don't disagree that the police need to investigate crime, but at the same time, what I think is a really important issue is the 17 to 19 million pound savings that we're going to be looking for in a few weeks and months' time if the financial envelope doesn't change. Because believe me, we won't just be talking about whether the police can turn up to this.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. Councillor Skinner, you want to go?
Yeah, just from the learning point of view, if you say they're going to look and listen, we have an awful lot of small filling stations that, quite frankly, won't be able to afford 50k just to change one pump. So the learning points of how to deal with it, it would be nice to get for you to go back, or the Chief Constable, go back this national association and give them some upskilling on those various points. So there's a, let's say, broad brush, there's a way they know of dealing with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'll just make a comment, and you've alluded to the 15 to 17 million shortfall that you could anticipate.
17 to 19.
Sorry, 17.
Small difference, but important.
Yeah, I know, important difference. And the strong likelihood, I mean, over the years, the police service nationally, not just in Lincolnshire, nationally, took its eye off the ball in terms of fraud. It's took its eye off the ball in terms of theft from shops. And we're now seeing highlighted across the country, large scale criminal gangs stealing from shops, even with violence. And it seems to be a trend and a journey that's going to develop about having to take its eye off the ball on certain categories because of your shortfall in funding.
Yeah, I mean, there is a real problem, and there's such a disparity because of the way the funding formula works that we have some forces that need to make no savings at all, and others that are dropping off the edge of a cliff. And as an example, and I made this point at the Growth Summit before coming here, in Humberside, they get below average funding for policing. So if they have the average, they'd have an additional £3 million. So I would love to see Humberside have the average, right? They'd have an additional 3 million. If I had per head of population the same as Humberside, I would have an additional £19 million a year, and I would not need to find these savings. So that's the difference. But to put it in perspective, there are as many neighbourhood police officers patrolling the town of Grimsby as we have in the whole of Lincolnshire. That's what the difference is when you're talking £90 million. And we are still fighting to get more funding. So we're fighting the funding formula. It's even things like national insurance. So there's some assurances coming that we might get some money out of the Home Office towards the national insurance change. But if they give us that on funding formula, I'll get £500,000 less than it's costing me a year. So I won't even get my costs recovered. Yet Cumbria will have £1.5 million more than it's spending as a windfall. So these kind of disparities constantly cause the problem. But to put it in perspective, and this isn't me saying this is what we're going to do, but to put it in perspective, if we removed a quarter of call handling staff and accepted it takes an hour to get through, if we got rid of all neighbourhood policing in Lincolnshire, if we got rid of the roads policing unit, the rural crime team, we'd still probably have 5 million to find. That's the scale we're dealing with. It's no small thing. And we're pushing hard, we're pushing all the different directions to try and close these gaps, work with government. But that is the reality of where we're at. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burke first. Thank you.
Just expand.
Excuse me.
You need some more.
Yeah.
Just expanding on that slightly. So we've got a new government, we've got that who's laid in the election campaign and those sort of areas we've seen there talk about increasing the need to increase policing. So that's the principle you're expanding. I think there's agreement on. And you've half answered my question by saying we are pushing in all directions to deal with that. So are we specifically doing that collectively, or the PCCs? And are we collectively saying to Yvette Cooper and the government, right, we need reform of the funding formula, and are we putting forward specific models to deal with that? Have we got a lot in mind?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no disagreement between PCCs and mayors across England and Wales about the need for funding formula reform. We all worked collectively for the last 2 years to create a very academically robust new formula, which none of us have seen the detail of, but we all agreed that the methodology was fair.
Right.
And it was due to go to consultation under the last government. The issue was really, really clear that number 10 went, this is great. As long as there are no winners and losers, we should implement this. It then went to Treasury, who went, this is great. We're not putting any more money in, so obviously there will be some winners and losers. And number 10 went, well, we better sit on that then. And then it didn't go to consultation. And then I started a judicial review to challenge that. And then they called the general election, which was unfortunate. So then the conversation starts again with brand new ministers who are completely new to the subject matter, completely new to the circumstances Lincolnshire and Wiltshire and Bedfordshire face. So you're trying to work with them. Now, in fairness, we have a Lincoln MP who is a minister. We've spoken at length with him. He's a tad busy trying to sort out the Middle East, but he is finding time to take up this conversation with the police minister as well. So we've had numerous conversations with him. All of our MPs across Lincolnshire are of one mind and will to work together to promote this. So you've got 3 separate political parties there willing to work together, understanding the challenge that we've got. So that's all great. The difficulty is there is an awful lot of priorities for a new government, as we know, and this isn't a massively high one. So while they're talking about a new neighbourhood policing guarantee, which would put additionality into neighbourhood teams, and they've recently written to us to say we're trying to baseline how many you've currently got, because then they can measure additionality. The problem is, and we had this with the previous officer uplift, it's what you benchmark. So last time they allowed us to benchmark what we were budgeting for, not what we currently had, because we were expecting to drop in police officer numbers at that time. So they allowed us to benchmark from the new number, not the old number. The same needs to apply with this, because if they benchmark from the number we've currently got rather than what we can afford moving forward, then we're going to have a massive disparity. So that's really where we're at with the conversation at the moment. I've had conversations with finance officials in the Home Office as well. They really do understand the scenario we're in, but they can't do something special for us because then they get judicially reviewed by somebody else. So this is always the problem. So it is, but we are now at the point where I've done everything I reasonably can over the last 8 years to keep everything moving forward, to bring in additional funding from government, and we'll still do it, but we will be lessening the 19 million, not eradicating it. So we will be left with an amount that we're going to have to take out of the budget. And obviously we don't know yet what council tax is going to look like either, which is an added variable.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Chairman. Morning, Commissioner. A massive problem. Humberside doing rather well. Perhaps Humberside should take over Lincolnshire, then we could have the tax that they've got.
They wouldn't get any more money. They'd get the same money.
I don't really believe in counter-based policing. I believe in regional policing. I think that's absolutely the way forward, really. I don't think council really works. But obviously that's an opinion of mine. Working on a regional basis, then perhaps we might be a better deal out of all this for all of us. Let's in the end, if the residents count, that's the really important thing. Are they going to get the policing that they feel they're entitled?
Well, I would have to say I would fundamentally disagree with you. If you think the police being dispersed across Nottingham city centre, Leicester, Derby is going to put more police in Boston, I'm afraid I don't agree. I think Lincolnshire would be considered the poor cousin in that. They would, we have this when we work regionally around serious and organised crime and other things, that actually, if it wasn't for formulas that we put in place to make sure we get a reasonable share of the service, everything would get sucked into those big urban areas. And that's one of the problems we have when you look at the funding model we currently use. It is urban centric. It drives the funding away from rurality. And this is one of the challenges with Humberside. It is actually more urban. I mean, you know, you've got the North Bank there where you've got Hull, you've equally got Grimsby, Cleethorpes, Scunthorpe, which have got some specific challenges. Yeah, I mean, you could have police area reorganisation, but 10 years after they did that in Scotland, they haven't saved a penny. In fact, it cost them more money. They were still operating on multiple different systems. They couldn't talk to each other on the radios. All the same problems were there that were there before. It hadn't actually solved anything. So I'm not entirely sure it would give you a wholesale change in a positive way. It would save some money on producing separate badges with Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire written on, but I don't think you'd save much else, frankly.
Well, when I come back, Scotland's another country. I don't have any. But I think that perhaps if we did have Humberside included in Lincolnshire, since they're able to manufacture a better grant because of their housing, I presume, maybe we'll benefit from having the benefits of Humberside included in Lincolnshire, and maybe resolve your £19 million shortage.
Well, as I say, I don't think it's on anybody's agenda to do police reform of that scale. You couldn't just do Lincolnshire Humberside. You'd have to review the 43 force model. And that would be a significant piece of work. And it would be, I think in Yesman's, they'd say it was a courageous decision to do that in your first term if you want to actually achieve anything else, because it would swallow up all the bandwidth of the Home Office. And they are quite busy trying to deal with some other matters as well. So I think it would be a challenge.
Well, that's up there.
Okay, next question, Councillor Beale, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, with the new combined authority in Lincolnshire Mayor or Major, depending on how it's written, sort of from next May, how do you see the PCC role changing? What advantages, challenges do you envisage? And what scrutiny arrangements would need to be put in place?
Well, we've already arranged that as part of the new combined authority, APCC will sit on that, although they won't be a voting member in the way that the local authorities are, but they are actually, APCC will sit on that. And we've agreed between the two PCCs that it would be the Lincolnshire PCC that would be the substantive person sitting there, as it was all of our police area and only half of theirs. But both PCCs would have the right to attend meetings, and if the other one wished to get views heard at the meeting, they could obviously feed those in through the PCC that sits there. A bit like the arrangements with districts, not all of them will sit on the combined authority, but they will bring the information in that way. So there will be a join up, but because it's not coterminous in area, the PCC powers are not just being sort of taken into the mayoralty. So the model is generally, if you had an area that was the same physical footprint, the PCC would cease to be, and then the mayor would take on PCC powers, and then they would appoint a deputy mayor for policing and crime to actually do the day-to-day. That won't be happening unless at some point they do what Councillor Wood have said, which is do the reorganisation, because it isn't coterminous. So at this stage, it won't fundamentally change how the PCC structure works, but it will mean that there is another contact to try and drive strategic change across the county. And I can only see that as being a good thing, if I'm honest, to have somebody else that's operating at that national level as well as regional and local to be able to work with the PCC to try and improve things.
Would you perceive that you would need to increase your staff to deal with that? Because the mayor obviously will inevitably have greater powers given to him by government.
I mean, I suppose at the tiny point, it might be him or her. But I don't believe so based on what I know today. I mean, because they're not taking powers that link directly to the PCC. So although there'll be some additional work in sitting on the combined authority, I don't think at this stage I see it as being so substantive that it would need additional staffing to deal with that. And with the size and scale of the budget issues that I'm talking about, I'm certainly not going to be prioritising a member of staff in my office over putting an extra pair of boots on the ground. So I think it unlikely, unless something statutory changes that fundamentally changes what we know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Williams, please.
Two quick questions. Well, one quick question, certainly, and another one. Are you able to give us an update on the new model for public assurance? You had it slated, I think, for this month that you were anticipating introducing something new.
Not yet. I mean,
do you think that will happen?
well, we're working that through. We're doing a dry run with some things next week, but until we've done all of that and tested it, then I can't be sure that that will be the model that we'll adopt. So, but we're imminently there. So I think it's Monday. No, it's not Monday. Next week. It's later in the week, next week, that we're doing sort of some dry run testing and actually running through a meeting and seeing how it goes. But it is very much at that beta stage. So once we've done that, then we'll have a model that we can share.
Another more general question links to some of the things we've talked about already. The report you give, full of information, really informative, really helpful. So thank you for that. The question I've got really revolves around the impact of the various initiatives, additional funding and so on that you have detailed. And for example, I'm not really clear in what you give, what the implications are or what the impact has been on crime rates in various areas. And we've already touched on this in relation to war, I know. So I guess my question in general terms is, do you have any thoughts on how you might provide the panel with evidence of impact and outcome, and how you might be demonstrating to the panel at these meetings whether what success looks like and whether you've achieved success or whether there have been limitations on your.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a number of points I'd make. Firstly, it's not for me to tell the panel how they would like to receive their information. I mean, I'm not here to do that. So I'm open to, that kind of conversation. The second thing I'd say is this is very much about us delivering against the police and crime plan and sort of priorities and how that's going. Some things will have quite specific outcomes and some things won't, frankly, because they are working in partnership and they are more difficult to be clear on. So, for example, the fact where we're talking about LDAS and co-funding around the domestic abuse service, it is not a service that I am commissioning, but obviously it makes sense that we work in partnership to do that, and it's using some of the budget that comes from my office. But what I'm then not doing is reporting to you going, and these are all the outcomes. It's not my service, but it will appear in the report because of that. So I guess there will be some things that it's less easy to be specific on, either because we don't own it or because it's around education and some of the other questions we've talked about, which are generally considered to be the right things to do for various reasons, but they're not necessarily specific, nailed down going, well, that has reduced crime by 3%, not least of which, because when you see, so if we did a big initiative on fraud and scams, which we did fairly recently, we can evaluate how people receive that. We can evaluate, has it changed your behaviour? But ultimately, then we're not necessarily going to be able to say, and we've seen a crime reduction as a result, because that crime reduction may or may not have been as a direct consequence of that. So it's quite difficult to gauge how we could get a definitive. And I feel very much like this about governments and league tables. Measuring things doesn't always lead to the right outcomes.
I accept that. I accept the complexity and the sort of many interlinkages between sort of or associations between input and outcomes and all that. So I guess my final question to you then is, would you be prepared, if the panel is happy with it, to meet with us outside of these meetings to sort of think about the way in which the reports are presented and whether there are different ways of giving us some kind of an information that it allows us to have a better feel for the outcomes, delivery again, specifically in relation to delivery of the
It's entirely within the panel's gift to tell me what information it wants. And we will obviously respond if there are resource implications. So if, for instance, I go, well, I can do that, I'm going to have to employ a data analyst, and that's going to cost me £60,000, and that means there's one fewer police officers on the street. Are you really sure you want me to do this?
Yeah.
If the panel says yes, we do, that's definitely what we want, then we can discuss it. So it's a bigger conversation because it depends what you want and how you want it delivered. I have not got slack in the team to do that additionality. So somebody would have to do the work. And I guess that would be my only comment, is it's not me saying no, it's me saying, well, it's up to the panel to decide how, we presented a very different set of reports previously, and then it was decided that this was a better format, and I do think this works much better. But it's entirely up to the panel how you ultimately want to request the information from us.
Sure, and I guess my thinking is understand all of that and accept it, but rather than us say this is what we want, I think it's important for us to understand the context and the limitations of data particularly, and so to have a discussion about, okay, what is practical from your point of view and what is useful to the panel, and to have that discussion outside of these meetings so that then when we make the request, if you like, it is a request that we know that is achievable from your point of view and useful from the panel's point of view.
As I say, that's a request the panel are able to make. That's not something that is within my gift. If you request that of me, then we will have that conversation and we'll look at it.
Great. I mean, shall we look at having an hour's session in the new year where we could invite you to, so we can commonly agree?
As I say, Chair, if that works for you. I mean, personally, I think we're going to end up in a position where I'm going to end up employing somebody to do this stuff. That would be regrettable, but if that's what you need to be able to do it, then that's okay. But I'm happy to have the discussion. I'm just being really honest. I've not got lots of, to pull this together. And the thematic, for example, meant other work stops to do that. So, and I don't begrudge it, it's important, but there will be implications. I guess so we can have that discussion, understand those implications, and then see what it is you want and need.
I certainly don't think we'd want you to employ somebody and in mind the cost of that, and particularly if it impacted on a police officer. Yeah, in Lincolnshire. So I don't think we'd be asking that, but it'd be useful to have a conversation outside of this meeting, no more than an hour, to come to some common agreement on what can be achieved. I think.
But as I say, I'm open to that. It's not a problem.
We'll arrange that through your office for the new year. You okay with that, Mr. Williams? Yeah. Members okay with that? Yeah, we'll look to do that then. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you. This is about funding, but it's about the judicial review. In your report, it talks about judicial review being out of time, and I wondered if I didn't understand what that meant.
Well, basically what it means is because there isn't the nature of the police funding, the time it's in time to challenge it is pretty much at the point when we're all being given the money.
Yes.
And it would be quite unreasonable, in my opinion, of me to say, I'm putting every force on notice that I'm challenging the fact that you've got this money and I will want it all bringing back to the centre and reallocate it. Because you can imagine the chaos that's going to cause to everybody's budget. So what we knew we were doing was challenging outside of that window to say, look, it's guidance, not anything more than that about the time scale. So the judge can make a decision to look at a substantive issue regardless of the timing. And that's really what we were working on, the basis that if they would look at the substantive issues, it would make it right ahead of the next funding round rather than challenging the next funding round in real time. And they haven't looked at the substantive issue. They've just said, oh no, it's out of time on the guidance. So then we've requested, which is proper the next stage, which is where we have that meeting with them to discuss. Because it might be they've just not understood that what we're trying to do is actually save a whole load of time, effort and cost to the entire service. If not, then we will in real time challenge the new formula or the new allocation when it comes out in January. So it makes sense for them to see this now rather than wait until we do it then. So it's all about the process rather than anything else. They've not looked at the case and said the case isn't valid. It's all about just this bit of guidance. And sometimes some judges will look at it and say, I can see the substantive argument, I will look at that. And others won't even look at the argument or just say it's out of time. And that basically is where we're at. They haven't looked at the substantive argument yet.
And I think I understand you're appealing that.
Yeah, so we'll have that conversation with them, which is our opportunity then to explain the why we're doing it out of that time, because to do it in time would be really problematic for policing. So we'll do that if we have to do, but I'm just trying to avoid that level of chaos, because saying to every police force, look, I know you've just had that allocation of funding, but now we're challenging the amount you've got. You can imagine that's going to be very difficult. So it doesn't make sense for anybody to look at it in that way. It's much better because we're not challenging this year's allocation. We're saying it's the process we're trying to resolve. And that way, obviously, then we're not getting a continuation over future years. So that's the conversation we're trying to have with them, is about we're not challenging the money, it's the process. And if you don't allow that, we will be challenging the money and the process in real time next year.
So, I mean, judicial reviews are expensive, and the appeal process, there'll be extra cost to that. Do you think that this process is value for money?
Well, it's cost a few £1,000s, like not tens of, less than.
Right.
And I'm trying to save us from £19 million worth of cuts.
Yes.
So I don't think I've got a lot of choice, frankly. If I haven't turned over every single stone to prevent that scale of change for the service that the public receive, I think I'm being very remiss. So I wouldn't ever apologise for doing everything I can to try and bring that missing millions into Lincolnshire. And certainly what is a very modest amount of money when you're talking about legal processes, I think is definitely worth it. And as I say, the all I'm seeking to do is get them to go to consultation on the formula they've already developed. They've already got it. It's not even saying do a whole load of work. It's literally going consult on it, move to the next stage. So they can choose to do that if they wish. And I don't think it's a particularly big ask. And there is cross-party agreement amongst PCCs that they should do that. The initial letter that was sent by the APCC board when there was a change of government was co-signed by Emily Spurrell, who is the Merseyside PCC, who is now the chair, but was vice chair at that point, and Donna Jones, who was the chair, who is now the vice chair. So that was a Labour and a Conservative collectively, both saying, as leaders of this, we agree this needs to be done. It was one of the top 3 priority asks that we had.
Thank you. £90 million worth of cuts, worst case scenario. In terms of a timeline, when do you think the public of Lincolnshire will get to know the direction around that?
Well, we obviously have to set the budget in the new year. So we will come back here in February regarding council tax, and then, as you know, the weeks following that we create and set the budget. So until I know how much council tax we've got, we can't be clear what the budget's going to be.
No.
So it will be in those weeks between February and April. But there was meant to be a January recruitment of police officers. That's been pushed back to March to give time for clarity as to whether the budget round that we're just unpicking at the moment, whether that would provide sufficient funding for us to go ahead with that. There's an additional implication. So we have to maintain 1,189 police officers or we drop below the uplift figure that was agreed under the previous government. What we don't know definitively is whether the new government will apply that rule this year. I believe they will. If they do, if I drop below that number, they take another 3 point something million off us, which means I have to lose another 70 officers. So you're penalised for being poor. So that's the issue, is want to maintain the officer number because we want the officers, but we also have that additional pressure. So, and as you know, you can't make officers redundant. They will either retire or leave. So you can only predict the change in officer numbers based on how many historically do. It's about 60-ish per year. So it takes years to reduce the number, even if that was your what you have to do. So it's quite a challenge to sort of balance all of those factors. But as soon as we have clarity, then we'll be clear. But at the moment, there is a consultation that we're putting out in the crime and policing survey we do every single year. And in there is the questions that we always ask about council tax. You put in your council tax band and we give them the figures so they know which one it is. And there is an option for if they don't know. And it will tell you some choices about what it will be. Now, at the moment, the legal cap is 2%. So I know at the moment the council tax could go up by up to 2%. They may move that. In previous years, it has been moved, and sometimes it's a monetary value the same, you know, a band D by £13, £15, £10, whatever, which is usually about 5%. So they might do that. Equally, they might lift the cap completely, or they might not lift it at all. So I'm consulting, as I always do, on a range of things. But to be clear, for me to not need to put any cuts, we would need to put council tax up 37%. Clearly, that's an unlikely scenario. Firstly, because people have got to pay it. And secondly, because the cap's 2%. So all of these variables are still in the air.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, and very complex for you. Okay. Well, that completes our questioning, Commissioner, and thank you today for coming and answering our questions on both the report subject of VOG and the delivery of your plan. Thank you.
Good idea.
Okay, Mr. Birch, the item 9 on the agenda, the complaints position statement, you've reported into us.
So I've laid out, you've got details of the content made through that time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Which one do you want? Hey, item 11, that's the National Association of Police Firing Crime Panels.
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Burke.
Thank you. There hasn't been a meeting of late. However, I've had several calls from the chair of the Association. And so where they are, there's been considerable change in the panel because there's been a number of changes in county authorities, changes in PPCs. Possibly the biggest change since PPCs came in to play. So there's a realignment going on, and the panels have got more labour than it had before, but also more independence. It's always been a non-political panel, and it does get into the detail of what's happening in each police and crime commissioner area. So it's interesting, and they are in close contact with the Home Office, and it's still very much worthwhile us sending someone to it. I'm quite happy to continue.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing on behalf of the panel and working with the National Association.
Thank you, Chair.
Any questions for Councillor Burke from the members?
Have you had a look?
Right, we'll go back to item 10 now, which is the annual report working group. Mr. Williams, you chaired that group, so if you want to talk to this, please, thank you.
Right, okay, well, there's not really very much I need to add to the minutes that you've had of the working group meeting and the accompanying briefing notes. I'll just make a couple of general comments about what I think would be our proposed direction of travel and how it might be informed into the first annual report and subsequent annual reports, if you like. Now, the first thing to say is that we did look at a number of example annual reports that were produced by other police and crime panels. It's, I think, reasonable to say that they vary in content and quality and usefulness. Some of them seem to be extremely comprehensive and provide a very good indication of the level of activity that the panel has undertaken, including specific areas of scrutiny. Others, however, are less, if you like, detailed and really only go so far as to provide a summary of the meetings and the things that you could distill from the minutes of meetings anyway if you went into their parts, and they tend to be quite brief. And I think it's also fair to say that in my estimation, and please speak up if anybody has a view of the reasons for the disparity, if you like, quality of the reports, really boils down to the approach and the structure around the panels, the way the panels themselves work, and the way that the work of those panels feeds into the annual reports. And to cut the long story short, where panels have subcommittees established to look at specific areas of activity, for example, a subcommittee concerned with precept and budget, a subcommittee established to look specifically at plan delivery, even a subcommittee set up to look at complaints. So there are different models out there that we can look at. But it does appear to be the case that where the panels have subcommittees that in turn report into the panel, that enables the panels to not just produce a more comprehensive annual report. And actually, that is not the be all and end all. I think the key to this is that enables those panels to demonstrate quite clearly how they are fulfilling their mandate and the extent and the effectiveness of the level of scrutiny that they're applying to the PCC in his scrutiny also of their respective chiefs. So that in broad terms is how the landscape, if you like, looks in relation to panels, insofar as we've looked at it. We didn't look at every single panel report, but we have a good selection anyway. So you'll see from the report that I briefly outlined the nature of the subgroups that different panels have. Now, what we're not proposing as a result of the group that we had is that we should immediately break out into half a dozen different subgroups, and that will enable us to then produce an annual report for Lincolnshire. And that patently isn't the case or the recommendation at the moment. But I think it's also important to say that the direction of travel ideally would be incremental. But if we agree that we go ahead and do a report starting, for example, this year, that after that we may well decide that it is helpful and useful for us to establish subgroups that would look at specific areas, as I said, and that would be for us to discuss and agree between us in light of the examples I've shown, and also our thinking in terms of what's going to be useful for us. So the first report we're suggesting would be effectively a snapshot, a first take on what we, as we are currently configured, are able to demonstrate by way of the report in terms of our impact, the nature of the scrutiny that we've provided, and so on. Now, again, my view is that that will achieve two things. First of all, it will get the ball rolling in terms of having an annual report in place. But I also think it's going to demonstrate to us the shortcomings, perhaps, potentially, in terms of the nature of the meetings that we have, of the extent to which we've been able, I'm not saying we're not applying scrutiny, but the extent to which we've been able to demonstrate the level and the nature of the scrutiny that we provide. Okay. And then it would be after that first report that we could then take stock and say, okay, what do we think we could now usefully do in relation to our existing resources and what we want to achieve with the commissioner in future years. Now, I think it's also helpful that we had a discussion with the commissioner a few minutes ago, and he agreed in principle, I think, that it would be good to have a meeting outside of this, the formal meetings, to think about the look and the feel of the report that he provides to us, that maybe will give us more of an indication of how he is reflecting on the delivery against his police and crime plan. And then we could get something that is more a clear articulation, if you like, of his performance in relation, or the force's performance in relation to its achievements of the police and crime plan. And I do accept, the limitations and the complexities that he is outlining. But by the same token, when I look at his report, it doesn't tell me. It tells me how much money he's spending and what the latest initiatives are. And it does tell me in some areas towards the end of the report what the latest figures are. But there's no sense of trend. There's no sense of this is how we're performing against my expectations at the beginning of this year or at the beginning of this planning period. We don't get that from him in the way, and that's not a criticism. That's just an observation in terms of the way that his report is configured. So I think there's two bodies of work there, if you like, that would run in parallel. One would be our development of our thinking in terms of what our plan might look like, which I've outlined here in, I think, 1.6, which is the sort of first proposal, if you like, in terms of what this year's plan report might look like. But the other piece of work that we could do in the meantime with the commissioner is speak with him about how he might refine or readjust the nature of his report that would then enable us to move the whole agenda forward so that we can achieve that final goal, which in my view is an ability for the panel, both through its meetings, but consolidated into an annual report, can demonstrate how we're fulfilling our role in holding him to account and pressing the test on a range of issues that is emerging from his reports in relation to what he set out as being his main goals in his police and crime plan. So I'll park it there for the moment and just invite
Thank you.
questions. Or
Yeah, there are a couple of people wanting to come in. Councillor Dilks first.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thanks for the work you've done on it today. I really welcome it, and I look forward to it. Obviously, you've looked at it being an online report and having hard copies available for those who wish a hard copy. So I wanted to sort of, what do we mean by hard copy? Do we mean this sort of thing, or do we mean a booklet? If it's a booklet, how are we going to get that done? Who's going to design it? And so on. And then, you know, how big a booklet are we thinking of? And obviously then there's the finance of that. And then I think, and I've worked in this area previously, is I think almost the most important thing, next step is, you know, your sort of schedule of, you know, how are you going to get to the end of it, you know, when all the copies got to be in by, when you need all the photographs, what's the sign-off procedure through the chairman, and does it come back to the committee? I don't know, etc. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, these things tend to slip, don't they? You know?
Well, I think a number of the specific questions you've got there, I haven't got an answer to, because we need to agree that and come back with proposals. But I think the questions are well made, and we need to address those. We did discuss in broad terms what it might look like initially. It ain't going to be Encyclopedia Britannica. It's going to be, certainly in the first cut, it's going to be short. How glossy it is, and we discussed that. I mean, you will have resources and ability to provide us with support and the ability to provide a hard copy.
Yes, I think we did touch on it briefly at the meeting, and I think it needed further discussion as with the possibility of discussing this for future group meeting. We do have some facilities, we have our communications team we might be able to utilise, but yeah, there would need to be discussions about what was expected, I think.
I think initially the key thing is to agree in principle what's proposed.
Absolutely, I understand it.
Accepting that.
I wasn't making it in any way.
Oh, no, and make it really, the questions are really helpful. So I think if we can agree in principle what the first report might look like, we can then determine what's the most effective way of publishing it. Yes, there will be hard copies. Who those hard copies are going to be for? Well, you know, there'll be some that we will distribute, but I think the main vehicle is going to be online. I think the idea of an annual report also addresses that other question about the visibility and the public consciousness of the work of the police and crime panel. And I think that would be a discussion that the whole panel would want to have, because that's not just about the report, it's about the profile of the panel, which clearly is a panel-wide issue. I think the other thing to just observe on, thinking ahead, and this is not about the first report, if we're agreed that we're going to go ahead with it, but in subsequent reports and the potential for subgroups and so on, that very much links into the question of additional independent co-opted members and the sort of skills that we might be looking for from those individuals. If we take another two people on, one we might want to bolster our knowledge and expertise, if you like, in budget setting and operational and strategic planning, for example. And those are the sorts of areas that we could then look to potentially have a subgroup working on. So that's something we could think about in the future as well, which is why I think when we discussed it, certainly it was quite a good idea to link the work of the annual report group with the business of the recruitment of two additional members.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Beale?
Thank you. Totally agree with what David said. When you do look at the different variations that you get out there, it is quite surprising. What we have to remember, if you want, is that in going ahead, the first one has got to be more factual with regards to explaining to the wider public what the PCC is and does, and what this panel is and does. From there on, to a degree, I'm a strong believer in not reinventing the wheel, but just nicking somebody else's draft and rewording it slightly and repainting it. So in that sense, I suspect that the first edition,
Well, Avon and Somerset replaced with Lincolnshire.
it's effectively, you know, the first edition, if you want, I don't think it to be too difficult, because we've got all the drafts, etc., on what we want to do. But the subsequent one, which will go into more detail with regards to the scrutiny, etc., yes, then that is going to be more complex.
If I might just add to that, yes, I think we have got models out there, and certainly in terms of sort of the key points that they address and the way in which it is framed, I think we can take that and even the structure of the report. I think the level of the detail we're going to be constrained by. I think one request I'd make, certainly for the remaining meetings, now I don't know how many we'll have, is it only 1 or 2 meetings between now and next June, when we would expect this report, the first report, to be drafted. I think our approach to those meetings, if we can hold at the back of our mind, is going to be the minutes and the outcomes of those meetings that are going to form the basis of the first report. And I've sort of said, I'm quite happy to take the lead in drafting that first report, but it's going to be helpful if we can think about that in terms of outcomes. So I've got some tangibles to draw out from future meetings, as well as, you know, looking back over the meetings we've had so far this year.
And of course, we've also got to remember the need to provide it in Braille or non-English, etc. as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aiming to finish this meeting at 4 o'clock. Councillor Bird.
I'll be well within 3 minutes then.
Well, we've got all the right items on the agenda as well.
I'll be brief, and I'll just emphasise one element of this, and I think it informs us in why we are looking at this. One of the things we're looking at is there's a great fear that our democracy is quite fragile, and I think the more we can explain to the public what we're doing, give them more access and more understanding of the work that we do on behalf of the public, and it is part of their democracy and part of holding an important part of the state to account. So that to me is a primary function of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Okay, so the panel in the paper is invited to consider and agree the proposals in the report. So could I have a proposer for agreeing that report? Councillor Pessel, and a seconder, Councillor Bird. All in favour? Unanimous. So thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you to all those members who have taken part. Did you want to come back?
Just a final comment then. So if the next stage of all of this will be in the new year, perhaps if I link that with both the recruitment of independent members and also linking up with the commissioner about the nature of his report.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll touch base with you.
Yeah.
Chair.
Yeah.
I'll actually go about taking that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Use that as a sort of working.
No, that's really useful, and it strengthens our position and profile as holding the commissioner to account, and at the same time supporting him. So yeah, I think it's a really good piece of work. So thank you. And just very quickly, we talked about scrutiny. I am aware that the Lincolnshire Police has had a full inspection by Her Majesty's Inspectorate. The report is, I don't know whether the Lincolnshire Police have know what's in it yet. It's certainly not published in the public domain, but I think once it is published, I think as a panel, we've got a role to play there in looking at that from a scrutiny perspective around performance of the force. Bearing in mind, the Commissioner is already talking about the potential of a £19 million door. So I think once that report is out, that's something that we should look at for the future. Okay, so Item 12 on the agenda work programme.
Yeah, nothing to add to what's in the papers. Our next meeting is the 7th of February and we will consider the research.
Thank you. And that's item 13 is the date of the next meeting, which Emily's just said is Friday the 7th of February. So can I thank you all today for your attendance and your questioning of the Commissioner. Thank you. I will 4 o'clock on the dot. I will formally close the meeting. Thank you.